Hi, welcome to today's webinar, the fully automated rate making process. I'm your host, Jonathan Moran from Ernix, and I will be moderating today's webinar. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Attendees will be silenced throughout the presentation. At the end of our webinar, we will have time for questions and answers. To ask a question, please use the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen. If you run into any technical issues along the way, please send a note to victor.vlad@ernix.com. That's victor.vlad@ernix.com. So with that, welcome to our first webinar in our Thought Leadership webinar series, targeting the insurance industry ecosystem, the fully automated rate-making process. We are fortunate to have with us today Drew Lawyer. Drew Lawyer is the head of professional services for Americas at Ernix, working with insurance providers both domestic and abroad. Drew has a variety of experience in the fields of pricing and rating, risk modeling, and pricing process efficiency. Prior to joining Ernix, Drew worked at Country Financial, where he held a variety of positions in the actuarial department. His work primarily focused around predictive modeling, competitive analysis, and experimental design. Drew holds a MS in statistics from Illinois State University. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Drew, and he will walk us through the agenda and the presentation. Thank you, Drew.
Thanks for the introduction, John. So excited to be meeting up with all of you, sharing some thoughts. Honestly, where this whole idea came from, with the idea of the fully automated rate making process, I used to present at my kids' junior high career fair. So we'd go set up a bunch of booths, and I would be there talking about automation. There was this fancy little website that some researchers out of the UK put together at one point in time, where you could type in any occupation and it would tell you your risk of being automated over the next 20 years. And so I would ask kids, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And really the point that I was trying to get at is it's hard as a child these days when a grown up asks you, what do you want to be when you grow up? To have like an answer that you can really resonate with. So I'm here in Central Illinois. One of the things I would hear a lot is farmer. I want to be a farmer when I grow up. Well, I'd plug that into the system and it'd say 76% of farmers are probably going to be automated in some way or another over the next few decades. Another one I would hear a lot is engineer. Well, engineers are relatively safe, so it's a very human, complex thought process. So it's really not going anywhere. Another one I would hear a lot is accountants. I want to be an accountant like my dad. Like, well, with a good old TurboTax, rules-based thought is not as relevant as it used to be. One thing I didn't hear a lot of were actuaries, though. You know what the risk of the actuarial profession being automated over the next few decades is? Well, I do, but I'm going to make you wait until the end of the presentation to actually find out. So automation's happening. Like, we see it happening all the time in different areas within our industry. Underwriters are working on their stay rate through processing. Customer service, have these fancy new chatbots that really are pretty slick. Claims, there's a lot of amazing things going on with claims, with image recognition and automated payments, things of that nature. But each one of these areas in a business is process heavy, right? There's a lot of people doing underwriting. There's a lot of people doing customer service. There's a lot of people doing claims, but there really aren't that many people doing pricing. But what about us? Like, what's going to be our next big breakthrough? When do we get to have something cool and sexy with our process? So what we're going to go through today, I'm going to talk us through what my vision is for the fully automated pricing process. This is just kind of my my personal dream for the industry. Who knows if it'll ever come true, but it's certainly fun to talk about. Then we'll get into some of the technology that's going to ultimately enable this vision. Talk through the pricing process, past versus present versus future. go through some of the changing roles and responsibilities that we actually need to execute this type of vision, and then ultimately go through the challenges and opportunities. So, automation. Most people, when you say automation, think, oh, this is just cost reduction. We're just trying to do things more efficiently, get fewer humans involved in this, and ultimately drive down costs. Well, truthfully, that's where it started. Back in the day, we were all for cost reduction. However, in the future, the benefits are way, way, way more substantial than just basic cost reduction. So, what can we realistically look forward to for benefits of automation within the pricing profession? Reduce rating errors. Companies have tons of rating errors that go out the door today. Most of them are due to bad business processes. With automation and having better control over this, we're going to be able to reduce the number of errors that are going out in our rating. Stronger compliance and governance. Same thing. So if we have stronger control over this end-to-end process, we're going to be able to reduce those errors. We're going to have more insight into it. We're also going to ultimately reduce our compliance risk. Obviously, we're just going to reduce manual processes. There are a lot of things that people are doing today in the pricing process where they are sitting there, they are punching numbers into dashboards, they are keying in rate tables. A lot of this work can just go away. Create transparency and auditability. Right now, if you go up to somebody in your department and say, hey, so exactly how do these rate pages get made? How does this happen? Somebody is trying to explain to you a process that they've been doing for 1, 2, 10, 15, 30 years. When things are automated, there's natively a certain level of control that goes into this, and we're able to get more value and have greater transparency. And then finally, increase processing speed and execution, so speed to market. The other week, myself and some of my colleagues facilitated a roundtable executive conversation out in Boston with a few local companies. And we asked them, what's the number one challenge that you have in your pricing process today? And uniformly, everyone said speed to market and agility. So automation is going to help us. It's going to help us get to the market faster. So why do we need to care about pricing automation? I mean, there's obviously the benefits. What I like to think, and I've really dedicated a lot of my professional career to analytical sophistication. How can I get the best math into the market? And so I would spend a lot of time just trying to do really good math and do my math a little bit better than the other guy. So yesterday, we didn't have great analytical sophistication and we didn't have great process sophistication. Today, we've actually come a long way with analytical sophistication. We have a lot of great things to be proud of as an industry and as pricing practitioners that we've been able to accomplish using new innovative data sources, new innovative techniques. But the reality is there's a certain level of diminishing returns. We can only get so analytically sophisticated. And right now I see a lot of companies spending a lot of time trying to squeeze out these last few drops of what I'll call analytical sophistication. At the end of the day, the amount of effort versus the value you get out of that is really starting to diminish quickly. But I believe that there is more competitive advantage to be had in process sophistication. So if we can take this analytics and we can put these into the market quicker, easier, more efficiently, that's where the next kind of area of value is that we're going to be able to unlock as pricing professionals. So what does this look like? What does this realistically look like, the fully automated pricing process? So this is my vision. What I would love to see is I come into the office and I push a button and immediately bot goes out, it grabs all of my data that I need to refit my loss cost models, need to refit my demand models. It ingests that. My models are automatically updated. They're automatically validated and cross-checked. Those models are then taken and they're transformed into rating structures. Those rating structures then have their factors. You know, kind of a factor selection process lays on top of that, and we transform from the raw loss cost into market ready prices. Those market ready prices are then tested, validated, filed, put into production, and finally we have a full monitoring process so we can actually monitor this in real time. And when we see things that start to get out of whack with our estimates, we go back and we start this process again. Yeah, like it's a dream. I think everybody should aspire to have some type of dream. This one's just mine. You know, this is what I get excited about. How do we get there though? Like it's not easy. Who knows if it's even realistic? But I think we all should have some type of beacon that we're shooting for. And so this one, in my professional career, this one's what I'm shooting for. First thing, we're going to need some technology. We're going to need some good technology. We're going to need some modern technology. And there is a lot of it out there. There's a lot of different tools that do different things. So let's take a look. And this is by no means an exhaustive list at all. These are just things that I've been seeing used for different parts of the automation. So classic VBA, you know, I don't know how many people I asked how their summer internship was, and they said, well, I got really comfortable programming in VBA. You know, it's a great tool. It serves its purpose, but I really view this as legacy technology. So it's good for doing select things. Really, you know, when you're working in the Excel world, it's good at automating those processes in the Excel world. I think we should aspire as an industry to start operating more outside of the Excel world, because I think there are things that are definitely better. But when you're working with an Excel, it does the job. SAS, you know, SAS is a great tool. I grew up working with SAS. It could do some amazing things. I think SAS is really best used when there are large, complex data sets that need to be transformed in a systematic way. The classic merging of exposures to claims, multi-million record complex joins. You know, SAS really does a pretty solid job at that, and really any SQL programming tool can do a good job. At the end of the day, this thing is expensive, it is heavy, and in general, we kind of see it declining in the market. Python, the up-and-comer. I don't know the last meeting I had where somebody didn't casually mention Python. You know, so I think in the R&D space, we were all getting used to R. Another great open source tool. Python, I think, is really going to be the future of the open source. So we're seeing rapid growth, and really, it's kind of a general purpose tool. There's a lot that it can do. RPA, robotic process automation. So this is a newer piece of technology. What I've seen is it's really good for automating processes in legacy systems. What you can think of RPA as is if there are a bunch of processes where you're literally just clicking this, clicking that, moving this thing to a different folder over and over again, and you think, wow, a robot could totally do that. That's what RPA is for. You know, so my prior role, we spent a lot of time using RPA within the underwriting process and trying to kind of reduce some of those manual underwriting tasks. It works very well with legacy technology because it really just kind of sits over top. The one thing I do have to tell you, though, is it feels like whenever I came up with a great idea, it's like, oh, you know what would be awesome for RPA? And I would lay out a complex vision. They would say, like, oh, yeah, that's way too tough. Like, we're still scratching the surface. And it seems to kind of be the general trend that I've been hearing at many companies. IPA. So IPA is kind of the next iteration of RPA. So this is really intelligent process automation. So where robotic process automation is more rules-based, IPA has a certain intelligence layer. So it combines machine learning, natural language processing, some other new cool techniques to just try to make it more adaptable, more flexible. Truthfully, there's a lot of hype. I haven't personally seen anybody use this particularly well. That said, it's a piece of technology that you should be familiar with it and understand the capabilities. AutoML, automated machine learning. So the idea of being able to just automatically rebuild your statistical models. Um, this is a great vision. It gets a lot of people excited. It's really fun to talk about. Um, Practically, there's some really strong use cases for it, and then there's some really weak use cases for it. So just like any technology, I think there's a time and a place for it, but it's not going to be the be-all, end-all tool. Final thing, natural language processing, another piece of technology that had a lot of hype a few years ago. I think this one has ultimately started kind of converging, where there's some great uses for natural language processing. Those ones are pretty well documented in the sense of being able to just take language and convert it to code, or vice versa. So being able to automatically fill out forms using language, things of that nature, it's pretty straightforward. The biggest thing, and what I'm really trying to drive on with the tools and technology, is there is no one tool that can accomplish all of this. So anytime a vendor walks in and tells you like, hey, I can use this technology and it's going to take care of all your automation needs, that's simply not true. So have a variety of tools in your tool belt. When I was managing the R&D team at my prior role, when I brought people in, I would always say, tell me what tool you're most comfortable with. I have budget. I can get a variety of tools in here. And what you're going to do is build out the process how you think it makes the most sense. And instead of me prescribing the tools, I would have my team prescribe me the tools, and they kind of actually were able to lead by committee. And they ultimately were the ones who would recommend the right tools to use moving forward. So trust your people. So what technology is just hype? What are we just talking about and what's really out there? So I just wanted to key on a few of these pieces of technology. So this good old Gartner hype cycle from the 2019 AI report. So we can see AutoML is pretty much at its peak in terms of the hype. So I think this one's going to start tailing off here pretty soon. IPA, even though I would actually think it was still further down on the curve to the left. We're seeing this one is starting to peak. It's kind of following robotic process automation pretty quickly. Robotic process automation is quickly becoming, I think this one's actually going to go through the trough and get up to a productive state reasonably soon. Like, it has clear-cut use cases, and I think companies are getting more and more comfortable with it, similar to natural language processing. So that's it for a quick overview of the technology. What about the process? The process, in my mind, is really the key thing in all of this. So you need to love your process before you start automating it. If you start automating the process today, you're going to end up with something that is very clunky and just disjointed. This really takes you going back to the drawing board. I in my prior role, I actually sat through some interesting presentations where different actuaries were taking bits and pieces of the pricing process and actually doing really cool things to automate them. Using different access databases to compile information and run complex queries. And then they would do this and everybody would stand up and applaud. And I would kind of sit there and think, I was like, is this part of the process even necessary? Like, I understand it's part of the process today, but have we really stepped back and said, do I need to do this to still run a successful business? So that's one of the things that I'm challenging all of you today, is really step back and say, is this relevant? So don't read into this too much, but this is a legitimate pricing process map that I put together. It's ugly, or that I guess I assisted putting together. Pricing processes are generally ugly when you really map this thing out end to end. So the natural reaction is like, okay, let's go ahead and lean this out. Let's throw some Six Sigma methodology in this. Let's try to reduce some waste, like decrease the cycle time. And you know what? Continuous improvement is important and it's valid. However, I've been through enough of these types of projects where we shaved off a couple days here, we shaved off a couple days there, we reduced, maybe the FTE count on this one specific part of the process. We give each other high fives and we call it a day and go back to life as usual. Most of the time, in my opinion, the pricing process, the modern pricing process, is going to require a complete reinvention. Go back and just completely reinvent this thing. So my challenge to you is to sit down and map out what your pricing process really should look like. So here, I'm just breaking the pricing process into some simple steps. So this is kind of my pricing process at the 10,000 foot level. So obviously we start with our data. We go in, we build some statistical models. We use those statistical models to create rating structures. We then take those rating structures and do some factor selection on top of it. So we smooth out some of the factors. We add some other tables that were maybe not included in my GLMs. I am able to include other statistical models, maybe fixed expense models or even demand functions to make different filing selections. Once that's done, I then take that and I use a unified data set, a unified set of rating tables to do all of my deployment, all of my filing, all of my testing. I try to have this thing coming from a single source of truth and facilitate it that way. And then ultimately move into monitoring where we're able to close this feedback loop. So obviously monitoring is one of those steps in the process that never gets enough love, but what we're going to do is actually break down into each of these a little bit further and talk about the technology that's going to enable it, the actual steps for automation that go into each one of them, and who is most suited to actually lead the charge for each one of these areas. But before we do that, I got a couple of polling questions for you around the pricing process. So if you want to jump into the polling section of the application, I have 3 quick questions, I think. So first, how likely or how would you classify your overall pricing process? When you sit down and look at your end-to-end process, you say you got best in class, you say, you know what, like it's a solid process, but we could definitely do a little bit better. Is it, just kind of a manually clunky process, but it kind of gets the job done? Or, are you a firm believer it just needs to be blown up and rebuilt from the ground up? So I'm going to defer to John to let me know what the results look like.
Sure. Thanks, Drew. So we'll give everyone a few more seconds to answer the question. The polls tab is located on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see 3 different tabs, question polls, and you will select the polls tab and answer the question there. Okay, it looks like the results are coming in, but it looks like the majority of people, a little over 50%, are saying that their process is very manual, with rates being rebuilt multiple times. Slightly less than 50% are saying that it's a great process, but it could certainly be modernized. And 7% of respondents want to blow the whole thing up and start over. So it's probably in line with what we expected, Drew.
Yep, no, that's definitely in line. So did we have anybody say if they were truly best in class?
I think we had 2% of respondents say that. 2%.
Okay, good. So, let's go ahead and jump into the next polling question. And as you said, John, those results were kind of in line with what I would have anticipated. I know at my prior company, the process was very manual. So when we start thinking about it, over the next 5 years, what percent of this process do you think could be automated? And truthfully, this is kind of loose. It's kind of subjective, just like most of the polling questions that I typically ask are. But when I say percent of the process that can be automated, think about all the different steps in your process, not necessarily the time, but the number of steps, the number of handoffs, the number of data extractions, things like that. What percent do we think that we could actually automate?
All right, and again, we'll give people a few seconds to enter their responses. Okay, looks like we've got a majority here. So, Drew, it looks like about 40% of our respondents are saying that they believe they can automate 50 to 75% of their pricing process. It looks like about 30% of respondents say that they can automate 25 to 50%. And then a very small percentage in both the 10 to 25% category and the over 75% category. So a nice bell curve there.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's truthfully about what I would expect to see. So even though my dream is to be able to automate this 99%, I'm a realist, and I think 50% is my ideal target for the next 5 years. So it seems like many people are kind of share that vision. So final question, what would you say is the number one challenge that you have today in your pricing process? Is it that you're getting a lot of errors? It's just way too slow speed to market? You feel like the technology restrictions, so you just can't do what you actually want to do? Translate the models into rating structures. So maybe you have these great machine learning models and you just don't even know how to like stick those into rating structures and file them. Or you just have too many cooks in the kitchen. You know, there's actuaries are trying to set the prices and product management's trying to set the prices. And then you have people from the operations side saying, oh, all this stuff's too complex and you need to ask them fewer questions. So what is the number one thing that you'd say that you're up against?
Great. It looks like we've got a clear winner here, Drew. It looks like slow speed to market is the number one challenge. Following speed to market are technology restrictions, with about a quarter of all respondents saying technology restrictions, and then prone to rating errors, translation of models, and too many cooks in the kitchen all have a handful of responses. So not very much. So
Awesome.
yeah, speed to market.
Awesome. No, well, and so it's good to hear. I'm definitely seeing a lot of consistency in the industry right now. So as I shared with you earlier, this roundtable that we facilitated the few weeks ago, that was the number one complaint that folks also had, was the agility and the speed to market. So thank you for providing a little bit more insight into your pricing process. One thing I do want to let you know is to be on the lookout. We're actually going to do an expanded survey around pricing processes and automation that's going to be coming out here sometime this year, where we can dig into this much deeper and really understand the challenges and what companies are doing and how we can ultimately kind of succeed as an industry, because this really does seem to be a pretty universal industry challenge that we're facing right now. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the process. Honestly, there's a lot that goes into this. This kind of gets into a certain level of detail. We're going to go through a lot of this pretty quickly, but of course we'll have time for questions and probably be able to make some of this content available to you. So with that, data management. So a few points on data management. So one of the things when we're talking about automation and as it relates to data is obviously, like you obviously need your data processes automated. And I think companies are actually doing a really good job at this today. I think they're bringing in lots of different data from lots of different sources. They're figuring out how to standardize it pretty well. And it really is the starting point. This is the entry point. And without good data, it's hard to really facilitate the rest of the process in a meaningful way and get meaningful results. One of the things that I have been lecturing the industry about a little bit is the idea of bringing your analytic data closer to your production data. So right now we have production data, and truthfully, it's kind of ugly, it's kind of messy, but it goes through sometimes 2, 3, 5, 10 layers of cleansing before it gets to us. And yeah, maybe the data looks really pretty when it gets to us. However, getting your analytics back into a production state now becomes that much harder. If we're able to successfully unify our analytics data with simple translation layers in our production data, we're going to be able to get our analytics into market much, much, much quicker. So one of the key principles behind this is actually using structured data. So in general, when we do analytics, we think about data as flat files, right? So we just have, classic pricing data used to just be one record per vehicle with all the information you need to price that one vehicle, right? That's not how the future is going to work. Really, the next iteration is being able to use structured data where we have policy level information, we have vehicle level information below the vehicle. So we'll have multiple vehicles on the policy. Below the vehicle, we'll have multiple coverages for each given vehicle. Then we also have separate driver table, and then we have a claims table, and maybe it's a kind of a claims violation type of table. But truthfully, this is the rating structure, or the data structure that I'm seeing the industry start to converge on. Many companies are using this structure. I would say most are, that are moving into more of a structured data analytics type of environment. The other thing is data consistency. So making sure that we have unified data sources across our in-force, quotes, and testing data sets. So the more unified these data sets are, the easier it's going to be to automate things, the easier it's going to be to swap these processes in and out. One of the most successful companies I think I've ever worked with had a very impressive way that they handled data, which was essentially it's all comes from one giant table, right? It's all perfectly organized and orchestrated. So your in-force is in the same table as your quote is in the same table as your recent cancellations. And there's just different indicators to tell you how, where that customer is in their kind of customer life cycle. Internal versus external data. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is, obviously different companies have different internal, external data needs. Larger companies are able to operate with more just internal data. Smaller companies definitely need to supplement. But when we think about internal versus external for automation, which one's easier for your company to automate? Truthfully, for most companies, it seems like it's easier to automate external data. So being able to just ingest data with different API data feeds is easier than actually getting access to your own data in some cases. But it's just one of those things, even as you're doing data assessments, as you're thinking to add new variables to your rate order calculations, think about the future of what this means to your process, because there's going to be implications. So actions to automate during the data management stage: data extraction, standardization, validation, merging and appending, import, export, technologies. This is still kind of some classic SaaS technology. There's some great commercial tools out there for data work. So, the Alteryx type and Domino, those type of data cleansing and processing tools. Data engineers, if you haven't heard of this skill set, I would say they were some of the most useful people on my team at my prior company were my data engineers. So I would say one of the most important things too with the data automation is making sure that you have a strong connection between the IT and actuarial areas. Have healthy relationships. Honestly, one of the things that's always helped me out is take these guys out to lunch. Honestly, if you're not taking your IT guys out to lunch at least once a month, do it. You're going to thank me later. Obviously, there's some current issues with taking people out to lunch, but take them out to a virtual lunch. You can still thank me later. Moving into modeling. So what are the models that we use? There's a good old retention, conversion, new business models, expense allocation models, loss cost models. Obviously, loss cost models are at the core of what we do. It's funny because even in my career, when I was kind of working more as a practitioner, I would treat loss cost as this annual ad hoc process that I had to do. So every year I'd have to roll up my sleeves and go find this data and dig through it and clean it up and do all this audit. And it was like months and months of manual work. And I knew I was going to have to do it every single year. If you really just sit down, take the time, design the process right, and focus more on the process than the actual data and analysis, it's going to pay dividends. Like you're going to have a lot to show for it. One of the things too is once that data is created, there's typically two sets of loss cost models that I recommend companies build. We used to try to always facilitate it with one set, but using both building constrained models that fit into the market and regulatory constraints and building unconstrained models, which are the best estimate of loss that you can come up with. So these include maybe data elements that you just can't productionize for whatever reason, or functional forms. So maybe these are different machine learning algorithms that you're trying to use. Asking how much does this customer really cost me is a valuable piece of information. Because when we know that, and when we actually compare that best estimate of loss to the market price, you're guaranteed to find customers that are overpriced and underpriced. And at that point, you can start to automate other functions. So how does this flow into underwriting? So this is something that I was actually working on last year, and it's a very interesting, very exciting area of analysis. But ultimately, what it does is it starts to encroach on this whole concept that people keep saying to me is like, well, so how can we use machine learning models for pricing? Like, how can we actually use it for our premium calculation? Like, we can't file it. No regulator is going to accept it. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I understand it. I hear all of these arguments, but I'm a futurist. Like, I like thinking about the future, and I can't see a scenario where companies never use machine learning models in their pricing process. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't exactly know what the catalyst is that's going to be to help it break loose. But people that keep saying we'll never use machine learning models to generate premiums for prices, I don't think it's true. I think this is something that's going to come. I just don't know the details of when and how it's going to come about. So automating the model development. So we want to be able to actually refit our models with updated data. We want to try to identify new data elements that provide predictive power. We want to adjust our transformations, do different types of model comparison. Auto ML, it's really a great tool for this. I've done some work with Data Robot. They're a fantastic group over there. They actually have some interesting functionality both for updating machine learning models, but also for updating basic GLMs that do actually fit cleanly within kind of we'll call it the current regulatory framework. So, our data scientists, predictive modelers, statisticians are the ones definitely going through this process. So, creating the rating structure. So once we have our models done, we need to take these statistical models and turn them into a rating structure. So we have our current rates, a series of tables that we're combining together to generate our premium. The way I see it, when we automate this piece of the process, we actually have two basic options if we're considering what it would look like to be fully automated. And both of these are using the same basket of ingredients, right? So we have all of our data that we're able to use in the process. So option one is we actually just use the exact same table structure, and we're just refitting the exact same tables with updated factors. And you know what? Yep, we would put in some controls in there to make sure that the capping, dislocations aren't too great. Make sure even the individual factor level adjustment doesn't look too bad. Call out, create flags if we see factors changing too much, and figure out how to mitigate those changes. So that's option one. It's pretty straightforward. Option two actually gives us the ability to create all new rate tables. So what if we just say, who cares? I see what my old structure was last year. Why don't I just roll out a completely different structure? So table one kind of looks the same. Table two, I got rid of that one. Table three is blown out. I added 2 more interactions in that one. And I added this whole new table 4 that for whatever reason, last time it wasn't predictive. And so each rate change, I might end up with completely different looking tables. But if I can actually automatically file this and deploy this, and I have some high quality capping functions in there to minimize my dislocation, what's it matter? Like, what's it matter if my rating structure looks completely different month to month? Sure, the regulators will probably be annoyed, but again, that's just part of the process and how we manage that. So again, kind of probably a little provocative, but not completely far-fetched. So automating the structure creation. So we need to be able to transform our loss cost models, do factor grouping, add those additional tables that are outside of the GLM. So there's just a lot of kind of that rate making process that really goes in. Also being able to automate the audit function. So after we've created that rating structure, being able to loop data through there to make sure that the rates are coming out at a reasonable level. So I would say this is really one of the uglier pieces of the process today, is the handoff between R&D and pricing. Like this is manual, this is clunky, there are things that get lost in translation. This is essentially where people start saying, I see your research, and I'm saying, no, you can't do that. So let's figure out how to automate these things so that we can say yes to more stuff in the future. Factor selection. So once these rate tables are created, how do we actually get to the factor selection? A lot of companies, these two steps, creating rating structures and factor selection, are kind of combined into a pretty unified step. In my mind, they can actually be reasonably separated. So what is factor selection? So after I've created my rating tables, and I think about the classic actuarial filing exhibit, where I have current rates, indicated rates, selected rates. My selected is really just some type of factor that falls between current and indicated, where current is being populated from the current rate pages, indicated is being populated from my new loss cost models, and selected is falling somewhere between there. This is something that can actually be accomplished through prescriptive analytics. Some people would call this optimization. We could get into that whole debate. I'm just going to refer to this simply as automated factor selection. So what we would do here is we would define some type of objective function, our business goal. Honestly, in North America, most of the time it's going to be maximize vehicle growth. Next, we have to define a global constraint. So what are we trying to constrain this by? Because if all I cared about was vehicle growth, then I would just offer everybody $3 policies, and I would grow a lot of business really fast. So in most cases, the global constraint is going to be our combined ratio. So we put in whatever our target combined is, whether it's 99, 98, 95. And so it's going to say, hit a 98 combined ratio and grow as many vehicle and force on top of that. Next step is to do individual factor level constraints. Well, here we can actually see what those constraints are. My constraint is give me the optimal factor someplace between the current and the indicated. So we're able to set those limits on how that factor is optimized. Next, we want to actually define the relationship between these rating cells. We want to make sure that there's certain levels of monotonicity. So for example, BI limits. I don't want to offer cheaper coverage or I don't want to offer lower premiums for more coverage. And so we're able to define the relationship between these cells. And then ultimately we run an algorithm that's going to compute this. So it's, at the end of the day, it's just math. So in my world, this would be like the one place where we actually did have to provide an input to the fully automated process. And all we would have to do is say, what's our business strategy? We're pushing out towards some type of efficient frontier where we're trying to maximize volume or profit. But what I would need to input is just say, what's my goal? Am I trying to maximize profit? Am I trying to maximize volume? And what's my constraint? What's my target? What's my target level of profitability that I'm trying to achieve? Or what's my volume that I'm trying to get while maximizing profit? So again, technology, this can be facilitated through different tools. There's different specialized commercially available software. You'll see Python actually kind of shows up in all these steps just because it's such a general tool that can really accomplish a lot of things. With something like this, like I hate to do shameless plugs when I'm trying to educate people, but like, of course, Ernix kind of fits very nicely into this process, helping to facilitate that. It's really your actuaries, your product managers, because this one is so business required that they're going to be the ones to, provide those constraints in the business logic that they need to actually create something that they're comfortable is going to be able to be filed. And one other important piece is once the step is complete, you should always have a set of KPIs that you're trying to manage to. So once this is done, once a pricing scenario and the factor selection is made, you should have a set of projected KPIs. What's my profitability? What's my retention? What's my conversion? What's my competitive position? And then you should be able to manage that moving forward. So I'm going to go through these next stages a little bit quicker, seeing as we are quickly running out of time. So model deployments, rate testing, filing, monitoring. So this handoff is where most of the things get broken. Handing off between your actuarial department and your IT department. That handoff is one of the largest bottlenecks. How many times have you created something where you say, this should take me an afternoon, and IT say it's going to be 1,000 IT hours? So find ways to use automation to break that paradigm. Rate filing. So being able to actually compile the rate pages, I think this is one where this would be a great entry point. So obviously data, we already have spent a lot of time around automating data processes, but with filing, using natural language processing, VBA, RPA, IPA, I think there's a lot of exciting things that can happen on creating rate pages, filing rate pages. Rate testing, another process that I firmly believe should be reinvented from the ground up. The whole idea of being able to do rate testing and then we have to rebuild re-raters, I think this is an outdated way of viewing the world. I think what we really care about is that we are going to have the business results that we want to get. And right now we spend a lot of time doing re-rating. So this is one where I would just challenge you to go back to the drawing board and say, what does best in class really look like here? And then finally, monitoring. It's something a lot of people talk about, not very many people do. It just has to be part of the process. It just has to be a core discipline of the company. So implementation, roles and responsibilities. So there's a handful of things, a handful of people that are critical to this. Obviously, you need some executive level support. I would say the one key thing that I think is overlooked is the whole idea of a process owner. Who owns the pricing process? Who has insight from the end-to-end process in here? Somebody needs to be defined as the person who owns this process. Project managers, I think are amazing, amazing people. They are very talented, and truthfully, I love a good project manager because they do all the things that I suck at doing, like organizing groups and watching deliverables and resources and managing a timeline, just like the timeline of this webinar. And then obviously technical experts. We have to have people actually doing the work. One of the things that I see happen way too often these days is we have more people managing the work than actually doing the work. Like, let's get we got to roll up our sleeves and actually get stuff done. I would also say it's very important that the business has a good degree of ownership here. You definitely need IT, but the more that this can be owned by the business, the better you're going to be. So the challenge is, obviously there are a lot of things in our way. All of these boulders, these are all things that people are going to throw at you saying, the process is siloed. data work is going to take a lifetime. Regulators aren't going to accept that. If one thing goes wrong in this whole process, everybody just dismisses the entire thing. Even like just finding people with these skill sets. The thing with boulders is we got three options. We can either chip away at them, we can go around them, or we can blow them up. I just challenge you to figure out how you can get around these boulders, because too often I see people's performance reviews where they say, what was your goal last year? And there was to chip away at this boulder. And like you say, how much did you chip away at this boulder? And they said like this much. And you're like, okay, well, keep chipping. I think automation is a way to get around boulders or just completely blow them up. So key takeaways. Number one, you got to love your process before you automate it. If you're automating a bad process, you're just losing a lot of value here. You got to break this thing down into bite-sized pieces. You can't, if you walk into the executive steering committee saying that you're going to automate the entire process, you'll get people's attention, but then you got to explain to them piece by piece how it's going to actually happen. There's not one tool that's going to accomplish all of this. I would say in terms of tools, you might want to find one tool that can help orchestrate it. But to actually do all the automation, you're not going to find that one thing. Don't underestimate change management. This is going to freak people out, when you start talking about automation. People are hesitant, so you need to be able to bring them along in the right way. So I would say working with true change management professionals always pays dividends. And then identify this key person who's going to own the process from end to end. I would say this is just an amazing step one, is just having somebody with a line of sight over the end-to-end pricing process. And no, it should not be your chief actuary or your chief operating officer. It should actually be somebody who is a process expert. And then most importantly, it's a journey. You're not going to get there overnight. Don't get frustrated, but always have this in the back of your mind. Everything that you do, say, how can I automate this in the future? Because I really do sincerely believe that automation is going to be the future. Okay, so as I promised, we're back here. I plug in occupations and I plug in actuary. 21%. Yeah. What we do as professionals is not easy. It takes some creativity. But when we really look at our day-to-day lives, there's a lot of waste. I mean, copying graphs here and there, replying to certain things that you feel like you should never have to reply to. So what I tell you to do is just challenge it. Figure out how to make your life easier so that you can focus on the most important things. So with that, I, of course, went a little bit over my time allocated, but I'm always happy to continue this conversation. These are things that I'm passionate about. I love sharing my thoughts, sharing my experiences, and so I'm always happy to talk with you. So, John, at this point, you can throw out some questions, or we can just go ahead and.
Yeah, we've got Drew, we've got a couple of great questions that have come in. I'd like to cover maybe 2 to 3 questions, and then we will wrap things up. So the first question is around speed to market. Is speed to market a symptom of underlying root causes like clunky technology or error-prone steps in the process?
Speed to market. So yeah, it is. You're totally right. So if there was one silver bullet that fixed speed to market, we would have shot that bullet 100 times already. Trick is, it is a symptom of 100 things. And so really going through and doing a root cause analysis is important. But that's why we never make substantial progress, in my opinion. We're always able to shave a day off here, shave a day off there. And that's why I truly believe that for your pricing processes, we just need to go back to the drawing board and lay out our objectives. What are we trying to do? We want an accurate process. We want a fast process. We want something that's reproducible, something that's scalable. And when you set up these main objectives, everything's going to get a little bit easier.
Great. Thanks, Drew. So the next question that has come in is really around small insurance companies. So could you speak to the viability of automating processes that you would recommend for smaller insurers that may lack data volume to produce reliable automated indications? So what would be your tips and tricks for the smaller insurance companies out there?
Great question. So when I was with Country Financial, we were kind of this mid-size company. So there were some lines of business that you really had a lot of data, you had a lot of processes around, you had other ones that weren't, and so it kind of gave a good spread. So truthfully, for the smaller companies out there, I would say the key for me is to simplify. It's not going to be having the complex, heavy processes is not going to be your competitive advantage. And so being able to take these things and make them as simple as possible is number one, because that's just what we can do. And even for larger companies, I'm actually seeing them start to simplify things so that that makes them more manageable. The other key for smaller carriers, it's okay to use external partners. So somebody like your different management consulting type of companies who have worked with a handful of other smaller carriers, because the collective knowledge of the small carriers is powerful. And so it's okay. Sometimes that's not our initial reaction, but when I was working with a line of business that I didn't know anything about, and I just didn't really understand what I was up against, and I couldn't dedicate 3 full-time employees to automate something,
Got it.
I would
Got
work
it.
with an external partner.
Got it, Drew. Thank you. Thank you very much, Drew, for your insights. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. For more information on what Ernix does in pricing and rating automation, please visit the Ernix website. Please also stay tuned and join Ernix for our next webinar in the Insurance Webinar series. Have a great day and goodbye.